Duncan the Humbug? Wow. This episode of Thomas and Friends rocks. The episode starts while it is Christmas on the island of Sodor. It is a busy time, but the engines love this time of year. All the engines, that is, except for Duncan, who complains even more than usual. During the day, Duncan complains to Rhaenyra about the cold weather. He then complains to Rusty about the apparent lack of sand. Later, he complains about the extra passengers slowing him down to Skarloey, causing the engine to start losing his Christmas spirit. By the time Skarloey returns to the depot, he is not feeling very festive at all. Neither are Rhaenyra and Rusty, as the former believes that Duncan may turn Christmas into a big chore. Thomas arrives and tells them that even Duncan will be impressed by the brightly lit depot, but sure enough, Duncan arrives and starts complaining. Thomas tells his narrow-gauge friends that the Fat Controller is giving all of the standard gauge engines a new coat of paint. Duncan thinks this is unfair, but Rusty informs him that the Thin Controller is planning a similar treat for his narrow-gauge engines. Duncan is pleased, but goes off grumbling as usual. Skarloey and Rhaenyra have just about had enough of Duncan's complaining, and begin to wish that there was a way to stop him from it, even just for one day. Rusty then decides to talk to the Thin Controller about it. The next day, Duncan travels to the Steamworks for his fresh coat of paint, where he finds the Thin Controller talking to Victor. The Thin Controller tells Duncan that he is upsetting the other engines with his constant complaining, and that he will only get his coat of paint if he is cheerful for the rest of the day. Duncan accepts the challenge and sets off to work. On his way, Duncan meets Rhaenyra at a junction. Rhaenyra reminds Duncan to go slow on the icy rails. Duncan thanks Rhaenyra for the reminder. At Croven's Gate, Duncan has to wait while all the passengers climb aboard his coaches with their extra luggage. Skarloey arrives and notices that Duncan's attitude has completely changed since yesterday. Shortly, Duncan gets held up at a frozen level crossing. To pass the time, the passengers start to hum a Christmas tune. Duncan does not like the humming at all, but when he hears Rusty coming down the line, he grins and bears at the passengers' humming. Later, Duncan gets stuck behind Luke on a slippery hill. Try as he might, Luke cannot reach the summit. His wheels will not grip the rails. Duncan is very impatient with Luke and upsets him. Unfortunately, Rusty is watching Duncan with interest. Duncan realizes that he has upset Luke and decides to help his friend. As Luke's sandbox is empty, Duncan drops some sand on the line himself. He then buffers up to Luke and gives him a push to the top of the hill. Rusty has seen everything. Duncan feels sad. He knows that he lost his temper, and that means no new coat of paint for him. The next morning, Duncan heads to the Steamworks anyway to apologize for his behavior. As Duncan begins to explain to the Thin Controller, he is cut off mid-sentence. The Thin Controller explains that Duncan had done a very kind thing in helping Luke, and such usefulness should be rewarded with a new coat of paint. The Thin Controller also says that he had been wrong to make Duncan be cheerful all day. Rusty goes on to say that he is just that sort of engine, and, as Luke points out, it does not make him any less useful. And the episode ends, and that's how the episode goes. Do you know who likes this episode? Everyone, but I don't know who hates this episode. End of salute.